The latest must-read issued by the Pentagon last week is the first-ever National Defense Industrial Strategy. It acknowledges that America's manufacturing might isn't what it used to be, and that it's not really up to the task of supporting great powers' competition. We get one reaction now from the executive director of the Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University, Jerry McGinn. Jerry, good to have you back.
Great to be back with you, Tom.
And in your tour of duty at the Pentagon, the industrial base was your area of specialization, fair?
That's correct. That's correct.
So you've been looking at this for a long time, and we've had other manufacturing and DIB discussions before. Mm-hmm. Is this strategy just a admiring restatement of the problem, or is there some innovation in here?
You know, I think there's a benefit in this is the first of its kind to really kind of pull together all the threads of effort on the industrial base and develop a strategy. Like you said, a lot of things have been done previously, including when I was in government. And one of the things I like about this strategy is it recognizes that. It recognizes that, you know, these have been long-term challenges that have developed over time and that it's going to take time to address it, and that we've gone after it in a number of different ways. And I particularly like in this strategy that it recognizes the need for flexible acquisition, which I think is the most kind of fruitful thread for implementation. And then finally, I really like the fact that it recognizes the importance of allies and partners. It talks about that and how allies and partners fit within the overall industrial base, which is really good to see.
Right. I saw a story recently about a certain platform and a missile launching system that's made, I think, in Finland. Mm-hmm. And it takes a couple of years to put one of these together, and they're not in enough supply now, and they can't ramp up a thing that takes 2 years to make real quickly. Mm-hmm. But yes, we do rely on European, mostly, suppliers as much as U.S.
That's right. And a lot of either subcomponents or, you know, a lot of the U.S. subsidiaries of foreign-owned companies prime systems like the Navy frigate, the Bradley fighting vehicle. I mean, these are made in the U.S., but they're, primed by non-U.S. companies, technically.
And the strategy does mention a lot of issues, including instability of procurement, non-competitive practices, fragility of sub-tier suppliers. An economy produces what's in demand.
Right.
And for those things where there is a mixed economic need, say castings and forgings, I think are mentioning in there. We used to have a lot more foundries in the United States. Is that because a lot of the commercial demand has been going overseas for so long for metal parts?
Yeah, so I mean, there's sort of, given that the way the defense market is, it's a monopsony. You have one customer essentially, or a series of customers, and the demand, when you drop GDP of the percentage of GDP for defense from 5.5 to 3 from the Cold War to today, so a lot of the business for these things goes away, and then there's a lot of commercial items or kind of lower tier items that it is building the demand for those is in keeping those onshore is tough. And so there's been a lot of investment in that area, particularly in the last half decade plus, to try to rebuild kind of rare earth processing capacity for castings and forgings. And a lot of money's already got into that. And the strategy talks about that, which is great. But there's a lot, the more recently with response to Ukraine, as you mentioned, the inability to produce things faster, that's where a lot of focus is going. And that's a big as the strategy sets, is to increase the speed and scale of production. And that's where I think a lot can be done going forward.
Yes, to increase the speed and scale of production, though, takes multiple suppliers for the most part.
Yeah, that's right. And I think this is what I've kind of said and written about recently, is that I think there's a lot the department can do to change behaviors in that way. It can do things like second sourcing. It can do, if possible, do dual awards of contracts to providers so that you have more supply, more kind of hot lines of producers. And you see that with the recent award on 155 munitions. They awarded to 9 companies. 2 of them are non-U.S. companies. So you're building more capacity, and that's one way that you can create more competition. But the challenge is if the demand's not there, it's much harder to do that.
Right, and the report talks about that.
Yep, exactly.
We're speaking with Jerry McGinn. He's executive director of the Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University. And one of the points they make is there is limited visibility into international ally and partner requirements. That was a surprising finding.
Yeah, I think what they're talking about there is, the Foreign Military Sales System, which is a government-to-government system. It's very opaque, and there's a lot of kind of politics, that's involved in it in terms of congressional notification and so on. So it's really hard to get a handle on what foreign government needs are, in advance. So it's getting more kind of signaling that is one of the priorities that's been identified.
And a lot of what they say are actions. They have an action plan for each of these different areas. And I'm just looking at the one under resilient supply chains. Incentivize industry, manage inventory, and expand support for domestic, diversify, leverage data analytics. These are all kind of boilerplate prescriptions. This doesn't sound like there's it's a strategy, but it doesn't seem like a playbook yet.
That's a fair point. The question is now, okay, what does this lead to, right? Does it lead to changes in acquisition practices that help to buy more analytics? Is there investment that's backing up these actions? That's only going to be visible when the FY25 budget request comes out in terms of investment and any specific policy or acquisition regulatory changes to address some of the actions there.
And we've talked about this before, and this also talks about the regularity of demand signals to industry. So industry is incentivized to make the production investments it needs because it knows it has a steady demand.
Right.
Rotating inventories and so forth.
Right, and that's the key and this is where the government has a power as the monopsonist that they can better exploit, because getting demand, industry is only going to invest if they are specifically incentivized to do so through a contract action, because there's no incentive in the market today for them to have excess capacity. They'll get killed by their shareholders for it. So we have to think about how do you do that as the government buyer, and that could be things like creating surge cleanse, where the government pays a little bit more to have industry plan for building out excess capacity if the government tells them. So that way there's a bit more, like several $100,000 for the planning, but you may be able to surge if needed in 6 months versus 18. So there are actions the government can take that can help create more of an incentive structure.
And there's also some fine-grained tuning that would need to be done to these types of efforts, because if you're turning out the ordinance, that's one thing.
Right.
But the platform to launch the ordinance, that's another thing.
Right. No, that's fair. And one of the things that I've seen in what's going on with the Replicator initiative that Kath Hicks, the Deputy Secretary, is leading. And
this is the drone swarm
exactly.
idea. Yep.
And another program the Air Force is doing, they're looking to do simpler designs, more commercially available systems, things that you can – so you don't have to build exquisitely capable systems that take long, have to be tested a lot more fine. So they're trying to help short circuit kind of the production timeline by doing that. You don't do that with everything, right? But and so it's good to see kind of the department taking that approach. And I think there's more of that is coming down the pike.
Yeah, if you're building a multiple missile simultaneous interceptor system, you can't really simplify that.
Right.
But maybe if you're making a shell, I don't know, there's some components you could value analyze out of it and turn 5 pieces into one casting or something.
Yeah, or you could make frankly, you can simplify the production of the basic PGMs, precision guided munitions, right? So you don't have to just hand make them essentially like the Javelin and so on in ways. And that's one of the things like the Air Force is investing in. So more of that will be important, particularly where you need things you need to scale.
Yeah, there was an $80,000 television set at the Consumer Electronics Show, but probably in 2 years it'll be at Costco for $1,500.
Exactly.
That's kind of the idea they need there.
Yeah. Very, very fair.
So your general assessment, tell me if you agree with this, underlying this is a department that's worried. They mentioned being able to keep up with the pacing challenge.
Yep.
That's something you need to keep up with.
Yeah. No, the department is very clearly worried. And one of the things that the principal author of this was Laura Taylor Calais, who's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Base Policy. One of the things she said yesterday at her rollout event was that, the good thing about this is a very much a bipartisan effort. These are things that I saw when I was in government on both sides of the aisle. There's a strong recognition that it's one of the few areas where we have bipartisan consensus that we are upside down in a lot of areas with respect to Chinese threats, and we have to address that. This is a very strong call to action, and I welcome that, and I look forward to kind of working on the implementation, because I think implementation is the key. I mean, money is part of it, the more that invest, but a lot of that's out of control of the department. They can propose, but then Congress disposes. But how they buy the practices they use to design, budget, produce, and contract for these systems are ways that we can speed up the process and get more things to the warfighter.
Jerry